Hello.
Oh, good evening, Anthony. Good evening, Graham.
Hi, Charles. How are you doing?
Well, I'm doing all right. A bit of a convoluted journey to the point of actually being in a position to speak tonight. I'm in the head office at the York Theatre Royal. I'm in Tom Bird, the chief executive's office,
Yeah,
as we
and you're
record it
blooming,
tonight.
and you're blooming late. Let's get to the point here. You're actually blooming late, is what you
I,
are.
I, I wouldn't have chosen to be late. It was
Mm.
circumstances beyond my control, and I can only apologise. But anyway,
I hope
welcome on the
you're
wettest
saving the
of.
planet.
Yeah, well, I've been doing that as obviously
Yeah.
in my spare time. I like to squeeze that in occasionally. Just obviously, I don't like to talk about it. I like my charity contributions, but so wet night, horrible, miserable night. And I'm here in York tonight to see Guy Fawkes, not
Oh,
a
yeah.
person, obviously, but a play. Do you know
Oh,
anything
yeah.
about this play, Graham? Do you know anything about this?
Absolutely nothing. I only know that Guy Fawkes and the whole gunpowder plot had a lot more Yorkshire links than is usually addressed in any fictional or even semi-historical portrayal of events. That's what I do know.
Absolutely right. Well, of course, Guy was born in York,
Mm.
actually very near to where I am now, because he was there's a pub that's said to be the site where he was born, and the church in which he was christened is alongside, next door to the minster, the St Michael the Belfry. And of course, he went to school here in York, I think at St Peter's. So the tradition is that on the bonfire there will never be a Guy Fawkes on it. There will never be a Guy, because obviously the school
Mm.
wouldn't treat its alumni in such a way. So this is a new play running in York this week. It's taken 10 years to come to the stage. Started off with the Penny Dreadfuls doing a radio version of it, which the director Gemma Fairley liked, and put the suggestion to the writer David Reed to do a play about Guy Fawkes. And it's long been in a gestation period, far longer even than An Elephant, but it's finally arrived in York for its premiere. And this is tonight, so I'm seeing it. So I'm hoping to sort of reflect on it next week when I've seen it. It's being compared with, in style, maybe to something like Blackadder, a little bit of horrible histories about it as well. And it's
This is a
everything that's.
comedy. Is it a black comedy?
Yes, it's
Ah.
very much that in style, but it's also darker than that because Fawkes was a war-weary man. He'd been in war abroad for 13 years before coming back and deciding that it was time to have the Catholics back in charge of Britain. And it's the why I guess it's a comedy as much as anything is because of the way that the clashing egos of all those involved in the gunpowder plot, and maybe that's one
Mm.
of the things that cost them that and the fact that they had far more explosive than they could ever have needed to have, and that all the time that it took to get it in, maybe they could have got the job done a whole lot quicker than if they hadn't bothered to do so. So
Well, it
there's
was it was the early days of terrorism, so they weren't sure what they were doing.
you're right, prototype terrorists, I guess at the time. Although he wouldn't, of course, in any way want to have been thought as a terrorist. He believed he was doing absolutely the right thing, and but of course paid for it. That was that didn't happen. So he's known as the traitorous man of York, and yet obviously rather like who else in the city do we? Well, Richard III we feel in York doesn't really get the decent tributes that he might have done. The city has some form of
Charles,
affection, I guess, for
everything's in the
Fawkes.
south. You should know that everything important happened in the south by people born in the south. You should know that.
I should know that, and of course, who came here, Graham? Which highwaymen came here to York?
Dick Turpin.
He did, and what happened to Dick Turpin?
He didn't get an MBE.
He certainly didn't. He got the end of his life on a tether.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, in those days, that was the only form of justice. Really, they didn't really have like probation or suspended
No,
sentences. Well, they had suspended sentences, but that usually involved hanging.
that was the suspension. Interestingly, he
Mm.
was so flamboyant that he wore a white suit for his goodbyes on the tithe bar, and rather than waiting to be pushed, he actually jumped off him, and that's how he went. So,
That's style
an
for you. That
absolutely
is. That's good.
flamboyant rock and roll star unintentional death. And so that's what York did to Dick Turpin. Saw him off this planet.
A warm welcome to York.
Well, exactly. So, I mean, there's been plays about Dick Turpin here in York, but Guy Fawkes, you'd kind of think, well, actually, surely there should have been earlier plays about Guy Fawkes, and that's why this is particularly interesting that at last this is happening.
Bizarrely, it's a bit of a touchy subject because whereas the Carry On team did do Carry On Dick, based very loosely on the life of Dick Turpin,
yes.
And I mean the expression loosely, very loosely. There's never been a Carry On Guy or a Carry On Fawkes because it's not funny. It's still, despite the fact you got Guy Fawkes now, you got bonfires, etc., and it's part of like growing up, and children love it, and families love it. It still must be a touchy subject because it's not approached very often.
I think it's considered a folk's power, isn't it?
Oh yeah, a folk rising.
So I'll do a report back, Graham, next week on this play because I think it's starting in York, but it's one of those ones that potentially it could catch fire again. But it could. Yeah. It could.
It could go down. It could go down a bomb. Obviously, it could bomb.
Well, I'm going to resist all these in my review. Goes down a bomb. I'm not going to say these things. Now, Graham, my curiosity is perked by the fact that you've met a writer I really, really like. I mean, he's best known actually for being part of a pop band, but Bob Stanley is a brilliant writer about the world of pop. But you have met him at the Rayworth's Harrogate Literature Festival last weekend. Now, I'm tempted to think this hasn't quite gone as well. Again, it might just have been another one of your Graham Goodman type encounters or your Howard Jones encounter, because you say that it was like Churchill meeting Stalin.
Well, it was perfectly pleasant, and I don't think anything really went wrong. But I talked to him on the phone and got on really well, and I brought the fact that to write a book about pre-rock and roll and the roots of rock and roll through and the roots of pop was quite an unusual thing to do because the era from 1900 to the 1950s isn't really addressed by modern music critics whatsoever. I said, like, the only other books I could think of that had taken such a arborant approach to music history was Alex Ross's The Rest Is Noise about avant-garde classical music, and John Savage's Teenage about the 19th century roots of the phenomenon of teenagers and teenage culture. And he went, those books were touchstones for me, and I went, oh, that's good. I picked the right books to mention. So I was quite pleased to meet him backstage in the green room at the Crown Hotel during the Rayworth's Harrogate Literary Festival last Saturday. Although I didn't like going to the green room. It's a bit like getting an audience with the Pope. I never like going in green rooms. It was nice to meet him, and the other guests at the event included Susie Dent of Countdown, who I didn't meet, and the author Robert Harris, who I didn't meet, and Peter Snow, the great BBC legend, who I didn't meet. And I didn't really want to anyway because I'd rather meet Bob Stanley of St. Etienne. So I was ushered into the green room, and he's a totally likable, down-to-earth, normal chap. But I was so excited to start shaking hands with him. And I didn't stop shaking hands. And then a photographer's taking a photograph. And so we're still shaking hands for the photographer. So I said, well, this is like when Stalin met Churchill.
This is what I was wondering. I was going to ask you who was Churchill and who was Stalin in this encounter. But
that's what he said. He said, which one are you? And I said, Stalin, he usually won.
Yeah, but Churchill had the better lines, always. And that would be
Stalin,
a bit of a competition.
Who's
got the better
lines.
turn of phrase, Bob Stanley or Graham Chalmers? I mean, I'm on Chalmers' side here for great phraseology.
But Bob is a brilliant writer and a really nice fellow, but I think it was a bit too intense for him, really, because although his books are brilliantly written and very insightful and entertaining, I asked him during the Q&A part of the event that was about his new book, Let's Do It, The Birth of Pop.
Yeah.
I asked him that usually modern music critics look down on pop as a sort of second classism to rock. They really think that the golden era of music history was from the 50s to the late 70s, and by that, music critics usually mean rock and roll, beat groups, psychedelic rock, prog rock, heavy rock, country rock,
girl groups of the 1960s,
punk rock, but not pop. And I said, you're unusual because you actually take pop really seriously, and you're even more unusual in that you've actually analysed the birth of pop in the 1900s. I said, do you think, having done all this research, that all these other music critics were actually wrong about
Yeah.
the golden era being 50s to 70s? And you could see he didn't like being asked to in any way disparage any other music critics, so he sort of waffled around that and said, no, well, I wouldn't say they were wrong. And I felt like saying,
So
well, what are you saying then?
how does he define pop?
Well, I haven't read that part of the book yet, and pop must be. It has to be catchy. It has
Yeah.
to be short. You don't have a pop song that lasts 20 minutes.
No.
And obviously it has to be popular, though, hence the word pop, because
Hence the pop
he actually
word.
found,
Yeah.
he found when the word pop was first used, and it was used pretty early on, about 1910 or something like that. And it was an abbreviation of popular in the first place, but it was used
Yeah.
as pop in an advert. So if it's not popular, at the beginning, pop meant popular and short and melodic and catchy. But obviously, as the 20th century went along, pop outgrew its own roots and became something occasionally much more complicated. Although it never pop, you can't call a 20-minute song a pop song. It just isn't. So there are some limits on the definition of pop. The Beatles stretched the definition of pop as far as you could possibly take it, but even they would never done a 20-minute pop song because it wouldn't have been pop anymore. It would have been prog rock.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, as you say, people, look down on pop, but many a person more often knows a pop song than a rock song. Many a person day to day will listen to pop rather than rock. And childhood is often, and teen years is often defined more by pop than it would be by rock. And
Well,
I would
yes.
imagine that would go back to when, to the time that he's talking about. There would be witty ditties that would be considered pop at the time, rather than
Mm.
the more
Well,
erudite creations that were happening as well, and probably had the
yeah, the annoying thing
same
about
snobbish
pop,
reaction.
yeah, the great thing about pop is that an annoying thing as well is that if it's a great pop song, you may actually despise it, but you will not forget it. So I never liked Hot Chocolate when they were huge in the 70s and 80s. But can I shake those big pop hits by Hot
No,
Chocolate
you
in my
can't.
brain? No, probably like once, twice a week, a Hot Chocolate chorus comes in my head. I don't even want it to. It just sticks there. Hence that terrible modern expression, earworms, which they use instead of saying it's really catchy.
Yeah, I never
So a
liked
song
that
isn't really
term.
catchy anymore. It's an earworm. Ugh, that's horrible. Who wants an earworm? But it sort of sums up the disparaging viewpoint on pop amongst anybody who takes music seriously these days. They call it earworms, which I would never use that expression. A
Is
great
the
pop song
ideal
is this.
combination, though, to have rock credibility but to have pop hooks?
Well, yeah, that's the golden ticket, and that's what a lot of stuff from the 50s to the late 70s did doing, which
Yeah,
still carries on to the grain. Certainly carried on a bit in the 80s and 90s, and then
yeah.
less so in the noughties and even less so in the tens, but it still happens.
Mm.
I mean, if we actually look at field music, one of the greatest underrated British bands of the
Yeah,
last 15 years, they basically are pop most of the time, but they're definitely taken seriously.
yeah. I think that's the ideal. You could call Vampire Weekend pop, but they're rock as well.
Yeah,
But there's pop hooks to it.
you're entirely right. Once you start defining these things, though, you end up your own bottom because
Well, I think that's isn't that
there's
the
no,
irony with
yeah.
pop, that pop doesn't really want this kind of analysis. That pop isn't about that. It is supposed to snap, crackle, and pop and be
Mm.
gone. That's the point of it.
Yeah, I think basically pop, the basic, most root definition of pop is something which sticks in your brain,
Yeah.
but it has to be the whole song. So, for example, a 20-minute song with a very catchy bit for a minute and a half wouldn't be a pop song because you couldn't possibly remember a 20-minute song. You'd
Mm.
only remember that little catchy bit. So, a pop song is something that you could feasibly remember the whole thing. That's pop.
Does Bob Stanley address novelty records, which have been a huge part of the charts as well, going
Yeah,
way
well,
way back, Graham?
yeah, he always has. He's never been a snob. I mean, he doesn't sort of just like, Burt Bacharach pop or Gotham
Yeah,
King pop or, sophisticated pop. He likes pop that's frizzy and frothy
yeah.
and a bit silly. So he doesn't have that snobbery, which is why he's quite a unusual pop music critic
Mm.
or rock music critic or whatever you want to call it.
Mm. Absolutely. So the latest book, just give the book title again, if you would, Graham. The new Bob Stanley book.
Let's Do It, The Birth of Pop.
Let's
It's
do it.
a weighty tome of some 600 odd pages, and it's all fascinating stuff because he's dug out all anecdotes. He doesn't go for sort of dry analysis, he goes for telling people's stories as well. So
Yeah.
you get entertained at the same time.
In Harrogate, obviously, we know very strongly of the Crime Writers Literary Festival, a festival really as being seen as a festival of national significance. And what about the Harrogate Literature Festival? I guess as a kind of smaller scale in terms of how it's covered, but is this an event that's kind of gained momentum through the years?
It gets great national reviews. The Guardian rates it, and Harper's Magazine rates it as well. It's been going for 10 years. Its list of authors is usually very impressive,
Mm,
and it attracts a real wide mix of different types of authors, fiction and non-fiction, and also people with biographies often turn up. So you've had like David Cameron turning up, and Ed Miliband, and
yeah,
Sarah Ferguson, the Duchess of York's turned up.
yeah,
So it's a high caliber, well-regarded festival, but it can't possibly have the same impact that the Theakston's Old
no,
Peculiar Crime Writing Festival has,
mm,
because Theakston's festival is niche, and crime writing fans are a completely different breed.
yeah,
Someone who likes books may have nothing in common with someone else who likes books, but crime
yeah,
writing fans, when you actually see them in action at the Crime Writing Festival in Harrogate each year,
they do.
there's a real buzz about the place. They all get on really well, and they all chat to the authors. It's like joining a really nice club,
Mm.
and
Is
that's not the
it part
same
of
with
the
other
auspices of all the other Harrogate festivals? Is it under Sharon Kavanagh, or is it
kind of.
run separately from that?
Well, each of the things that the festival has done under Sharon Canavar since she became chief exec in 2009 has always been a standalone. They're
Yes.
they're like bespoke for that time of the year, for that length of time, then they go away.
Yeah.
They're not like part of a rolling, ongoing process. They're
No.
all tailored. Each event is tailored.
But it is under overall. It is under the
Yeah,
overall
yeah,
control. Yeah.
yeah. Without the festival in Sharon, these things wouldn't happen.
No. I mean, if one looks at it, in the range of festivals in Harrogate, it's impressive actually. I like the idea that it's spread through the year as well. I mean, in terms of promoting that, is that something that's easier to do or more difficult to do? That actually, lo and behold, there's been the Crime Writing Festival later in the year. There's the Harrogate Literature Festival. There's during the summer, more loosely based than previously. There is the summer festival. There's also the Spiegel tents. So, in terms of the fact that this is spread out widely, do you think that's a better approach to take?
At first, it was slightly problematical because at first, Harrogate National Festival was a summer event which contained all the different strands of the arts and the cultural world. And the only bit that wasn't in the summer was the Sunday series of lunchtime classical concert
Oh
recitals.
yeah,
And when Sharon first started doing this approach of like every 2 or 3 months there's another bespoke, tailored niche festival, at first it was quite hard for people to get their head around that idea that Harrogate Festival wasn't one festival, it was just a series of different festivals. But since she got the ball rolling, especially the last 6, 7 years, despite COVID, it really works because you just get an intense focus on that one festival
mm,
for about a month before it happens.
yeah,
And then it moves on to the next intense focus on a different festival. So there's clear delineation between the different events. And all that happens is that Harrogate National Festivals become, even in their title, Harrogate National Festivals Presents,
yeah,
and that is tagged on everything. So
yes.
it has worked.
That's the overall umbrella now, isn't
Yeah,
it? Yeah.
I
So
personally
Graham,
would love to see a proper splurge of all types of the arts in Harrogate, like the
yeah,
Edinburgh Festival or the Edinburgh Fringe, but
mm,
that's not happening, and it would
no,
definitely be much harder to do, and possibly not as successful. So you can't knock success.
no, no, exactly. Now, Graham, tangential to what we've been discussing, um, the question of Anthony Burgess, writer, of course, a futuristic writer from the past now. But interestingly, you reckon he had a blind spot when it came to pop and rock music, which is just what we've been discussing. What do you base this thought?
Well, it's quite a futuristic book. Came out in 1962
Hmm,
by Anthony Burgess, A Clockwork Orange. and the teenage character, the criminal type Droog, who uses his own teenage language, which ended up inspiring a whole myriad of British rock bands and British rock record labels and British everything for about 20 years, from the 70s to the 90s. There was always a word taken from what Alex, the Droog, the main character in A Clock Orange, had said, like ultraviolence, a little bit of the old ultraviolence. Those sort of words just turned up everywhere. So he's very futuristic, and his viewpoint on this, his cynical viewpoint on politics, whether it's establishment politics or even anti-establishment politics, is quite in the money. He's still in the money. His viewpoint on criminality and society still seems relevant when you read the book now. The one thing that doesn't stand out well is that early on in the book he takes the mickey out of pop stars, because the main character Alex loves Beethoven and classical music but hates rubbishy pop, and so the book starts off with quite a few sort of like mickey taking critiques of pop singers of the time. And in a way, well, when we were talking about pop earlier on, Anthony Burgess's viewpoint ties into the later snobbery of rock music critics, because he had no time really for pop music. And I can explain in greater detail why by quoting from a book which was published in 1970 by the great music filmmaker Tony Palmer, called Born Under a Bad Sign, which is about the history of rock in the 1960s, written by Tony Palmer, who'd filmed most of the famous rock stars. And I think the foreword's written by John Lennon. And there's a bit talking about pop music where Anthony Burgess gets his chance for a page or so to waffle on about what he thinks of pop music, and it's quite shocking how little he regards it. So he says, this is Anthony Burgess, quoted 1970, "I like pop as I like Coca-Cola or wrapped bread or fish fingers. They're instant and they give an illusion of nourishment, but I get very frightened when intellectuals start elevating pop to the level of important art. When they say such and such is a great record, I have to say, well, Beethoven's Ninth Symphony is great. Tristan and Isolde is great. Mahler's Song of the Earth is great. Do they mean great in the same way? I presume they must. They must be making out that pop contains the same elements of emotional satisfaction and intellectual complexity as Beethoven, Brahms, or Wagner. This doesn't seem to me to be possible. Even the best songs of the Beatles are only simple little lyrics written by young men of no great education and no great knowledge of our literary past. They do a very simple job very adequately, but nonetheless they deal with simple little emotions, suburban little emotions. They deal with adolescent love, with rather vague aspirations of adolescence, which are not backed up by any knowledge of the world." So that's what Anthony Burgess thought of the Beatles.
Well, I still maintain that everything can be said in a 3-minute pop song. Everything. And
yeah, well, he's right in a way, but
but when the word intellectual comes into music, do you listen to music intellectually? Do you?
All the time, Charles.
Graham, stop being so immodest. Do you listen to music intellectually?
No, but the thing is, like, if you look at pop music, quite a lot of pop tunes have either consciously or unconsciously ripped off pieces of classical music. And when he talks about classical music, Anthony Burgess, he's failing to mention that the reason that a lot of people like classical music and still do is for those famous bits which have very strong melodies, which are easy to remember, or you might even whistle along to. And those are the same bits that are used in TV
exactly
adverts.
The same for pop music.
For shampoo this very day. So the overlap between classical and pop is huge, and he didn't seem to realize that. And if I listen to Mahler's Ninth, it's immensely sad and immensely moving, and goes on for much longer than any songs by any pop or rock bands. But does that mean it's better than A Day in the Life by the Beatles?
No,
I don't think so. It's just different.
No, it doesn't. Of course, there's being transported by music over a length of time. Yes, I understand the pleasures and the sad pleasures in doing that. But if a pop song can get you there more quickly, I frankly want to be travelling on Concorde in music rather than travelling on a tractor.
Yeah, I like that. But I think the other thing I'd mention is that it takes a great skill to put in any intellectual depth into a 3-minute pop song or a 4-minute pop song. That itself is an art form.
It is. It's interesting because obviously when one's listening, I don't think that we end up being intellectualizing the impact of music, the significance of musical trends, why something works and something doesn't work, the significance of a musician over a long career, etc. All that is intellectual debating. But actually, when you come back to it, you are listening to a song for not those reasons, I believe. You're not. We can all see the merit of discussing the extraordinary impact of David Bowie, but ultimately, I would go back to Rebel Rebel and just enjoy it as a song, as a pop song.
Yeah, you're right. The base level of pop and rock that's a bit pop, apart from being short and having melody and being
Mm.
catchy, is that you enjoy it. If you don't enjoy it, it can't be pop. Godspeed You Black Emperor are an amazing band, and some of their meanderingly long Atmospheric tracks are
Mm.
amazing tracks, but they're not pop because
No.
they're not short. You don't remember it, and it's not actually enjoyable except in a weird way. So yeah, it has to be enjoyable, and you can enjoy "Day in the Life" by the Beatles as a sort of slightly weird pop song because it has instant emotional impact
Yeah.
and instant hook lines right throughout the whole sequence of different phases of that track. So it works as something you can not listen to seriously. But if you bother to listen to it seriously, you can detect all the meanings in it. You don't have to. Pop means you don't have to study it. If you have to study it, it's not pop.
I wonder if he has a theory on why you will find more people clinging to a pop song than going to a classical concert at Glyndebourne, for example.
No, that's not his jurisdiction, and
No.
that's a whole different can of beans, and
But
that's to do with
but
the
that but
class
that is the
system and
reality.
the education
That's the
system.
reality. That is the reality.
Yeah, but if you think about it, if we're going to get this very deeply, when
Mm.
classical music was at its peak in the 19th century and the 20th century,
Yeah.
and when the Romantic era, which was the most influential era of classical music, when that was at its peak, there weren't mass audiences for classical music. It wasn't
No.
like there weren't any records, there weren't any TV shows. You didn't get T-shirts of Beethoven or Mahler. It was
Nope.
it was an, it was an elite form of music for
Yeah.
the elite. So it never
Exactly.
was pop.
There
In
you are.
fact,
Music
a
for
lot,
the
a
for
lot
the elite, and that is still what classical music is up against, or opera's up against. This idea that it's music for the elite and pop by its very nature. The word populist is for the masses. That's again what I think Burgess is up against.
Yeah, but classical music's moved to the middle because the days when classical orchestras who were asked to play with rock bands and pop bands in 1960s Britain quite regularly after the Beatles started it in 65, 66, and they would show great disdain for the rock band whose record they're playing on. It's been recorded quite often that
Hmm.
the orchestras were not happy having to play with Deep Purple, for example, in 1969. They just thought, well, why are we doing this ridiculously juvenile, simple music when we're trained, experienced, sophisticated classical musicians, which is exactly what Burgess thought as well. Well, those days have gone. Classical musicians themselves, the ones I've seen, all love rock music and pop music and modern music, and they're quite happy to play semi-classical versions of rock and pop. So classical music's moved to the middle to try and keep an audience.
So where would you stand on the two albums that come to mind in recent times? Uh, Elvis Presley's songs being put to the backing of the Philharmonic, and likewise, and that was through the work of his wife doing that, and then likewise the songs of Roy Orbison having all manner of strings thrown at them. I mean, that's where the
Yeah,
classical works into the world of pop, and I don't think it's always a particularly happy marriage.
yeah, but that's not the same thing, Charles. These aren't classical reinterpretations of pop songs
No, they're not. They're
or
just
rock
add, they're
songs.
just adding
These are
they're
just
adding a
added
classical
strings.
framework to pop.
That's just like popping in two sugars in a cup of coffee. They're just
Yeah,
adding a bit of sweetness. I mean, it's the same reason that the Car, the new album with the Arctic Monkeys, has
yeah.
strings on so many tracks. It gives it a sweetness and a lightness,
Mm,
and it peps it up. And
mm.
strings are all over the car, and it certainly helped the album. That's been on since the 50s. 50s pop quite often had
Yeah,
strings, so there's nothing new about that. It's just
no.
the added kudos of having a classic orchestra on the record sleeve, as done by the Philharmonic. That's the only thing that's changed.
Now, I'm aware that time's ticking by and we've yet to have an all important interruption. I'm just wondering what might be troubling you for the need for an interruption at this point?
Little Sims won the Mercury Prize. That's for the
Yeah.
next interruption.
Now, is that troubling you in a good way or a bad way, or did it just seems to me yet again it's kind of how inevitable that she wins it, whether she deserves to or not?
I've heard some Little Sims tracks, and there's some talent there, and I quite like some of the tracks, and it's perfectly all right. But I don't rate her as being great. And when I watched the live show, or the recorded version of the live show before the winner was announced, and most of the acts played live, and Little Sim's voice was a bit dubious live, although the atmosphere of the performance was really good. But the best received performances by the audience, and the audience is fairly neutral at Mercury Prize, as you know, watching the television yourself. The best reaction was to Self-Esteem, and she's from Rotherham, and to Sam Fender, who's from Geordieland, as I like to call it, causing offence to anybody north of Teesside. But they got the best reaction. They got better reaction than Little Sims because they were both better live than Little Sims was. But Little Sims still won. And so I do this every time with the Mercury Prize. No matter who wins, I always think it was the wrong person. I'm not sure I've actually agreed with more than about 4 or 5 Mercury Prize results in the last 30 years, really. So
you would have agreed the year that Elbow won?
No, I've never been a huge Elbow fan.
Oh my word! I thought you'd have liked that.
No, I like Guy Garvey as a person. He's a great bloke.
He is.
But I find the songs a bit soporific and a bit sort of like, it's sort of like modern day MOR. I could imagine Jack Jones or Perry Como singing a lot of the Elbow tracks.
Well, that's a Jack Jones singing Elbow.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure.
As insults go, that's pretty strong, Graham. So
yeah, I can see why they're popular, though. I mean, it's not like they're bad. They're definitely not bad.
Well, Tony Bennett singing Elbow.
Well, I could see Tony Bennett singing Arctic Monkeys in the album. Actually, there's quite a few tracks that Tony Bennett could probably tackle.
Because he has sung with Lady Gaga, hasn't he? He's made 2 albums with Lady Gaga.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. But he's so old now as Tony Bennett that his voice obviously has deteriorated, although he's held out longer and better than Frank Sinatra, whose voice deteriorated quicker and got much worse than Tony Bennett's.
Yeah. Well, I saw Tony Bennett playing at York Barbican not that many years ago, and well into his 80s, I think. Into his 80s, I'm sure. Must be into his 80s. I think must be in his 80s.
I'm going to say it again, Charles. How was he? How was he?
How was he? He still had massive presence about him. He was as smooth as you could wish him to be.
You've been listening to the podcast Two Big Egos in a Small Car. Your hosts were Graham Chalmers and Charles Hutchinson. This was a Baltic Sub production.